Hello guys, welcome back to Mark Shrimp Tanks. In this most excellent video, right, we're going to talk about what is the best way to use a sponge filter in your shrimp tank. Okay, let's start at the beginning, right? What I would say one of the first key aspects of having a decent sponge filter setup is actually making sure that the sponge filter base is on the bottom of the tank or near the bottom of the tank. A lot of my sponge filters, they're just a little bit short, the double sponge filters, to actually reach the bottom, but they have an uplift tube that is adjustable. You should adjust these uplift tubes, guys, as long as possible so that the sponge filter sits in the bottom. Right, I have a little mock one here. Maybe I can show you over like this. Right, what I mean by that is instead of having the sponge filter sitting up, it doesn't make much sense with this one. But if you have other sponge filters with suction cups, instead of putting them halfway up the glass like this and having the outlet near the top, get them near the bottom, right? Because this will create more force as the bubbles come up, right? I'll explain all that in a minute as well, but the best way to position these is next to the bottom. Next up, guys, is the actual outlet piece, this part here, right? Where is the best position to put these? Well, in my opinion, that is, and that's after me doing a lot of research and talking to people that deal with fluid dynamics. In my opinion, I think the outlet should be just below the surface, right? Because then that gives you the most power for the amount of air that you're putting in your rib. Because in simple terms, guys, if you have this outlet above the surface of the water, what happens is you're losing a lot of power there, because you could be using that power to push the actual water around and create flow. I have it in a lot of my tanks where this top part here was actually out of the water, and that is not a good way to have it, guys, because think of it like this, right? For example, just see where my fingers are here. If that is the water surface, see all the bubbles that have to come up through the sponge filter here, right? They then have to support the weight of the water that is outside or above the actual surface of the water. Does that make sense? So the best way to have this would be to have it so that it is almost flush. So there's basically the least resistance as possible, right? But then you're getting more flow and stuff for the power that you're putting in with the amount of air that you have. Okay, and it's quite worth noting as well, guys, while we're doing this, is if you have bigger sponges like I do, in some of my tanks I have them this size where they have like a really wide opening like this, you have to put a lot of air through them or they won't be as efficient, right? There's no point putting a dribble of air through just a bubble every few seconds. That just won't work, right? Because what happens there is the bubble that's inside, the small bubble that comes up, has been overwhelmed by the amount of water that's coming in as well, and it kind of cancels itself out, right? So you need to put a decent amount of air through a sponge filter to make sure that it works, right? You need to do it so that there's enough air that goes through that it fills up this cavity, right? So we talked about positioning and submerging the outlet there. Let's talk about optimal flow, because these things are all tied together, right? I'm going to turn the camera around here and we're going to look at a tank that I did recently to show you the difference is in what happens when you move the sponge filter below the surface, above the surface, and when you keep it in line, right? So let's have a little look over here. I'm going to push this sponge filter down so you can see how the flow is impeded by the air hitting the water first and then coming to the surface. Generally, the flow will slow down because of this. Let's pull it above, like this, and you can see the same thing happens again. The flow tends to slow down. It looks lovely, doesn't it? But as we talked about before when we were talking about the positioning of the outlet, it makes sense for this to be in level with the water so that the water is not having to be lifted up here and then out using more bubble efficiency. My God, I'm so bad with words. Right, so let's see what happens when we push this down. As I said, the most efficient place is just below the water surface, and look at that, it's like a rocket. Right, you've increased the efficiency of your sponge filter greatly just by doing this. Let me pull it up again so you can see the difference. See how it slows down? Because you're losing power here. It's the same when you push it too far down. The bubbles are hitting the water first and then trying to come to the surface. You see it? There still is some power there, but this is by far the most efficient way to do it, is just below the surface. Look at the difference in the flow here. So I have it like this on all of my tanks now. Look, let's start over here. You can see I have these filter heads in line. Right, guys, trust me, I haven't increased my airflow at all in the room, but it looks like we have tons of power, doesn't it? Let's have a look over here. The same thing again, look, see how it's in line? You can just see that there, it's in line. These ones here are in line. These ones here are in line. It's working fantastically. This one is in line. You can see how much power I'm able to get through it. This is my bigger sponge filter. This one's in line. This one's in line. This one's in line, but I noticed on this one earlier that the bubbles are quite large as it comes out. So this tells me that this filter needs cleaned. There's a little tip for you. Bear in mind, guys, as I said before, I haven't increased the air supply to any of these tanks, just the same air supply as before, but it looks like a lot now, doesn't it? Look over here. Same thing again, loads and loads of flow. Loads of flow, loads of flow. The exact same power, but loads of flow, loads of flow, loads of flow, loads of flow, right? So you can see the way I've had mine set up. Now this filter here is a little bit short. It should have been a good 2 inches longer and it would have been perfectly efficient. And here's a good example of how it should be as well. This one here for an air filter. Makes it really efficient. So the filters in this tank, for example, have the perfect sponge filter placement. As in, the sponge filter itself is on the bottom of the tank and the outlet is at the top. That is what you're aiming for. Okay guys, for the interest of safety, we're going to talk about maintaining the sponge filters now. Right, before I used to rinse them under the tap, right, and I kind of think that might be a bad habit to get into because for me, for example, I have lots of soft water tanks. It's very hard to cultivate bacteria in a soft water sponge filter, so me taking chances and possibly reducing the amount of bacteria in my sponge filters by using tap water to clean them is a bad idea. Right, so I went back to doing it the way that you should do it, and that is when you do a water change, make sure that you keep some of the water and you wash your sponges in it. So there you have it, guys. There's 4 or 5 key steps to mastering your sponge filters and making your setup, making sure that your setup is set up properly. Right, so remember guys, every single shrimp tank is unique, so experiment, learn and enjoy the journey. That's how good it can be. Happy shrimp keeping, or should I say happy sponge filter keeping? Anyway guys, see you in the next one. Happy shrimp keeping.